We back with another video. Yeah, I'm talking to you, boy. We back with another video. Today we got why Blue's Clues is a fantasy inside of Law and Order. Alex Bell. Bro, where he be coming up with all these theories from, dog? Like, first he was doing SpongeBob, now we on the Blue's Clues. Like, what's going on, Alex Bell? It's something you need to talk about? What going on? Talking about some Blue Clue, Law and Order. I don't know where that come from. But before we get in this video, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Also check out my Instagram and my gaming YouTube channel. They'll be in the description below. Also, they'll be popping up on the screen somewhere. So make sure you guys check those out. This is childhood right here though. Don't do my dude Steve and Blue like that. Like, if you ain't watch Blue Clue growing up, I don't know what to tell you. You missed out on a whole lot. But let's go ahead and get into this video, because this video is 27 minutes long. 27 minutes is crazy. Let's go ahead and get into it. Hold the screen. Right. Hey, buddy.
Hi there.
What we doing, my dude?
Blue's Clues
Steve
is
like
an
that.
educational
Can't
children's
even replace
TV
him.
show about a man named Steve who lives in a magical world where he spends his day talking to inanimate objects, jumping through picture frames, and trying to find clues to help understand his magical blue dog. Law and Order
He finna say something wrong with Steve, but he finna say something
is
wrong
a
with
gritty,
Steve.
realistic police procedural / legal drama that involves New York City homicide detectives trying to solve murders and prosecute criminals. These two shows are very different. You could not find two shows more polar opposite than
He
Blue's
finna say they
Clues
similar.
and Law and Order. And yet, despite this, not only do I believe that these two shows exist in the same universe,
Bruh.
but I'm also going to be proving that the entire Blue's Clues
I ain't
show
never
is
watched Law
actually
and
just
Order.
a fantasy
I ain't gonna
inside
lie.
of the mind of a single Law and Order side character. Yes, I am being serious. I know that sounds
let me know if
crazy,
y'all
but
like Law and
just stick
Order.
with me. Because
ain't never
I'm
watched Law and
pretty
Order.
sure that I have discovered a 29-year-old secret that has never been talked about before today. Get ready, because this is the Blue's
Oh, that boy
Clues
Joe.
Law and
I
Order
remember Joe.
theory.
Joe came in right after Blue. I mean, not Blue, Steve. Man, Joe. I remember Joe. I ain't watching him. He on that new wave.
By far, the most common type of fan theory is the dream theory. The idea that everything happening in a story is actually all just inside of a character's head, whether they're stuck in a coma, or they're dreaming, or hallucinating, or they're actually dead. Pretty much every piece of media has some kind of dream theory. And it's sort of the lazy, low-hanging fruit of fan theories. You can just apply it to literally anything, and usually there's never actually any evidence
What?
besides, "Whoa, this show is so crazy and unrealistic, that must mean it's a dream!" Ah! And
Bro, that's what
surprisingly, the
cartoons
show
are,
that seems
dog.
to have the most of these types of fan theories is Blue's Clues. You got Steve is actually schizophrenic, Steve is actually in a mental asylum, Steve is actually a drug addict, Steve is actually in prison, Steve is actually a murderer who killed his parents. Oh my god. Even I made a parody of these theories back in 2017.
So yeah, it's a pretty basic, normal kid show.
That's 7 years
Steve,
ago.
a 30-year-old schizophrenic who killed his parents, pretends to be a kid.
You know, that was before I dedicated my life to making fan theories about kid shows. And look, I understand the appeal of these types of theories. It's fun to take something innocent from your childhood and give it a dark, edgy plot twist. That's kind of literally my job right now. But why are there so many of these
Wait, that
theories?
jump was 3
It's kind
years
of
ago?
literally-
Ain't no way them theories were 3 years ago, dog. Time went by that fast. 3 years ago? Bro, I thought that jump would at least hit like a year ago. 3 is crazy.
Really my job right now. But why are there so many of these theories about specifically Blue's Clues? Well, I think it's because everything about this show has always felt fake. Steve is the only real person in this
Let a man
world.
move it.
He looks like a young adult, but he acts like a
doing the
child.
forward
And he
moonwalk.
lives alone in a house where he spends his day jumping into picture frames or talking to unseen voices or inanimate objects. It just kind of sounds like I'm describing someone who is experiencing some kind of false reality. Even the way Steve moves around is strange. He never actually leaves the room, he just kind of pretends to walk in place while this fantasy world moves around
Man
him.
doing the forward moonwalk, dog.
Obviously, that was more of a filming limitation, but it still adds to this feeling of fakeness. But other than these surface level weird vibes the show gives off, there's never actually been any strong evidence to prove one of these theories. And believe me, I and others have looked. It has been 28 years since this show first came out. You know, you'd think if there was actually some kind of smoking gun here, we would have found it by now. But what if that's because we've all been
So
looking
28 years
in
old.
the wrong place? So, the other day, I stumbled upon an interesting piece of Blue's Clues trivia. A year after Steve Burns filmed the Blue's Clues pilot, he had a small role in an episode of Law and Order. And I thought the idea of seeing Steve from Blue's Clues in a gritty, realistic cop show was kind of funny, so I decided to track down the 1995 episode titled Cruel and Unusual. Just a heads up, this episode deals with some pretty serious subject matter, so please proceed with caution.
I'm getting the episode.
Disney Plus,
I guess in
Hulu,
the
and Max.
episode,
This is
the
so
man
cool.
must have like some type
Just the
of
beginning. The ultimate bundle
issue
for
going on or something.
In this episode, Steve Burns plays a
Yeah.
kid with autism named
Know it.
Kevin Jeffries.
Good morning, how are you?
Great.
What time is it?
10:15.
No, it's 10:18.
We learn that Kevin has trouble communicating with others and often harms himself. So his parents sent him to live in a children's behavioral clinic.
Just what was the behavioral clinic doing for him?
When Kevin was 10, he started to hurt himself.
We didn't know what to do. We couldn't keep Kevin here. We had to send him away.
We later find
Alone?
out that the doctors at this clinic were horribly mistreating him by giving him intense electroshock therapy and forcing him to wear a sensory deprivation helmet for days.
He kept Kathy in this helmet for 3 straight days. This helmet cut off the blood supply to our daughter's brain.
The episode starts with Kevin after he's escaped from the facility, but tragically he gets arrested and later succumbs to the injuries sustained from his abuse and dies.
I don't know, Mike. I think the kid's dead.
And the rest of the episode follows the detectives investigating his death. So yeah, this is a very sad and serious episode, and it deals with some real systemic issues that are still a problem today. And like I was saying, this show is clearly very, very different than Blue's Clues. But what I find interesting about this is that for years, people have been trying to prove that Steve is actually in prison or a mental facility, and now we have this piece of media where we see Steve's actor in that exact position, and as far as I'm aware, no one's ever really talked about this. I mean, sure, Kevin's not schizophrenic, he has autism, but seeing as how he was being abused and put into sensory deprivation for days where he couldn't hear or see anything, you can kind of imagine that anyone in that position might try to escape to some kind of fantasy inside of their head. So yeah, I thought this was an interesting coincidence, but at the end of the day, that's kinda all it was. Like, obviously, just because the same actor shows up in 2 different shows doesn't mean they're actually connected. But then, I took a closer look at this episode, and I started to notice more and more weird similarities between
Lord.
Kevin
Here we go.
and Steve.
Here we go.
At first, it just started with some little things. We are told by Kevin's parents that he was learning to draw.
Thanks to him, Kevin was learning to draw.
And in every episode of
Yeah,
Blue's
he draw-
Clues,
he draw
Steve
every
draws
episode.
in his handy-dandy notebook.
Our handy dandy notebook. Let's draw a rectangle.
I've been watching
and there,
Blue Clue.
cheese.
Okay, but so what? Lots of kids like to draw. But we are also told that when Kevin harmed himself, he was strapped to a chair.
We put them in a chair, then we hold them there
Thinking
using soft cuffs.
And in every episode of
Thinking
Blue's
chair.
Clues, Steve spends a lot of time in his thinking chair.
We're ready to sit in our
Thinking chair.
Now that we're in our thinking chair, let's think.
And then, when Kevin escaped the facility, he kept asking people what time it was.
What time is it?
10:15.
What time?
How you doing today, huh?
What time?
Now, it is common for some people with autism to rely on specific schedules or routines, but what time it is also really important in Blue's Clues.
What time is it?
What time is it now?
Steve has a cleanup time,
We just had cleanup time.
a nap time.
It's Blue's nap time.
Now it's time for so long. There's a talking
it's
clock.
time for
And
so
most of all,
long.
every day, Steve has mail time.
Hey, Blue, the mail's here.
So yeah, there's some
Here's the
weird
mail,
similarities
it never
here,
says it
but
make me
nothing
wanna wet
actually
myself. When it
concrete.
comes, I
I
wanna
didn't really
love
start to take
mail.
any of this
Nah,
seriously
just-
until
Was a kid,
I
bro.
realized. After Kevin escaped, we are told that he went to a movie theater. And guess what he did in the theater?
Movie started at 10. He was out of here by 10 after 10. Got out of his seat, walked into the screen.
Kevin got out of his seat and tried to walk into the screen. Doesn't that sound exactly like Steve Bluska doing into a
that do
picture?
sound something like
Blueska we can too.
Got out of his seat, walked into the screen.
This kind of feels like more than a coincidence. So this is when I first started to consider, is it really possible that Kevin Jeffries from Law & Order is the real Steve and Blue's Clues is all a fantasy he created to escape his abusive reality? Okay, I know you're not convinced yet, and to be honest, neither was I, but don't worry, we are just getting started. Kevin's behavioral clinic is in New York City, and the one time characters actually leave the Blue's Clues fantasy world and go to the real world, they end up in New York.
Blue's Clues in New York City? This is
Damn, wow, I do not
Also,
like
in the
that,
very
like-
first episode of Blue's Clues, we can see a
3D
newspaper from the New York Times inside of Steve's house, strongly implying that's actually where he lives. We can also see objects from Blue's Clues in Kevin's life. In Kevin's parents' house, we see a very large salt and pepper shaker, just like Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper.
Hi, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper.
Hello, Steve.
Hello, Steve.
And in
Everybody
the
got a
clinic,
salt
we
and
can
pepper
see
shaker,
a
though.
red bucket, just like Steve's friend, Pale.
Hello, Pale.
Hi, Steve.
Also, when Steve left the show to go to college, he left on a blue bus. And when Kevin escaped the clinic, in his pocket he had a schedule for the Greyhound,
Here you go.
Amtrak schedule, Greyhound schedules.
which is also a blue bus. Alright, those are some more interesting connections, but you're probably still not completely sold yet, right? Well, check this out. When Steve eventually left the show to go to college, he was replaced by his younger brother Joe,
Oh, hi. It's me, Steve's brother Joe.
and later, Joe got replaced by their cousin Josh.
Hi, it's me, Josh.
And not only does Kevin also have a younger brother, but at the clinic, there is a nurse named Joe
What's your name?
Joe Garvey.
Joe Garvey. You're under arrest for assault.
and an occupational therapist named Josh.
Take a
Joe
look
and Josh,
at the amended
to
complaint.
be honest, Joe and Josh are pretty, like, simple names, though. I can't lie.
An occupational therapist, Josh Bingham, was dropped.
I think that Kevin is taking aspects from his real life, like the objects or the names of the people working at the clinic, and applying them to his fantasy. Also, this one is less impressive, but the name Kevin is also the name of the Blue's Clues UK host.
Hello up there. It's me, Kevin.
Also, check this out. Kevin's behavioral clinic has the same initials as Blue's Clues. Huh? That one's also not that impressive, I know. But wait. If this theory is true, and all of this is just inside of Kevin's head, then why does the main character of his fantasy keep changing?
Hi, come on in. Hi, come on in. Hi, come on in.
Well, at first, I thought maybe Joe and Josh could actually just be from two different kids who took Kevin's spot in the clinic after he died. But the clinic gets shut down at the end of the episode.
You made them close the clinic.
So they would all have to be from Kevin. But why? Well, we're told that Kevin has tried to escape from the clinic before.
Well, we called the police this morning as soon as the clinic told us that Kevin ran away. He's done this before.
So what if every time a host leaves Blue's Clues, it's actually Kevin trying to escape the clinic, and when he's inevitably put back inside,
He's done this before.
his fantasy resets with a new Blue's Clues host.
Hi, come on in.
Hi, come on in. Hi, come on in.
Okay, so there is a surprising amount of connections here. You can't deny that. But it still kind of feels like we're missing something. Like, I can see why Kevin would imagine a fun, colorful world to escape his abuse, but why is Kevin's fantasy so focused on playing a scavenger hunt game
I'm
with
like
a
really
blue
trying to lock
dog? As
in.
far as I can tell, there's
lock
nothing similar to that in this episode. Well, I think to answer this, we need to take a closer look at what Blue's Clues actually is.
Oh, we are back.
What are we doing tonight?
Well,
At the beginning of the Law and Order episode, Kevin's doctor explained to the detectives why Kevin harmed himself.
It's pretty common with some autistic children. It's frustration because of their inability to communicate.
It's frustrations because of his inability to communicate. Now, autism is a spectrum, and it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than the way TV shows like this tend to portray it. But it is true that some people with autism have varying levels of difficulty communicating. And I think this becomes interesting when we take a look at what Blue's Clues actually is.
Well, what story should we tell?
Great idea. We'll play Blue's Clues to figure out what story Blue wants us to tell.
It's a game where you try to understand Blue,
story?
a character who has an inability to communicate. This is literally the entire premise of the show. So I think that this is telling us that Blue represents the side of Kevin who struggles to communicate with others. Okay, but where did the idea for a blue dog come from? Like I said, I couldn't find any references to dogs in this episode. The closest visual was this vaguely blue drawing in Kevin's room that I can't really make out, or this teddy bear that kind of had a similar pattern to Blue, but nothing really concrete, which is weird because Blue is such a major part of this fantasy. But then I realized it doesn't matter if we can't find a direct connection, because in Blue's Clues, Steve didn't actually adopt Blue. In a flashback episode of Blue's Clues, we learned that when Steve was younger, he read a book about a blue dog.
It's a book about a puppy.
Which caused Blue to magically come to life. And I think this is also probably what happened with Kevin. We see that the Children's Behavioral Clinic is full of what we can reasonably assume are children's books. Maybe there's a book in here that also gave Kevin the idea for a blue dog, just like Steve. In fact, this idea of a children's book giving Kevin ideas for his fantasy is exactly what we see at the start of the Blue's Clues intro.
Hi, it's me, Steve.
Every single episode of Blue's Clues starts with a stack of children's books in the real world, before going inside of a book called Blue's Clues where the episode takes place. The show literally tells us every episode that Steve's world is fake and comes from a book. And I think this real world full of children's books is actually the Law and Order Behavioral Clinic. And if this is true, that also means that there's probably a book literally called Blue's Clues in the clinic that Kevin is basing his fantasy off of. So even if we never see a blue dog or even hear the name Steve in this Law and Order episode, Kevin still could have gotten all of those ideas from an existing Blue's Clues book in the clinic. Now, the only thing that doesn't really fit with this idea is mail time.
Hello, mailbox.
Hi, Steve. Have I got a letter for you?
Sure, maybe the talking purple mailbox was just something from the book, but there's no way Steve watching videos of kids in the real world would be something in a children's book.
Look, it's a letter from our friends.
Hi, Steve. This is where we play with our blocks. This goes that way.
I forgot they used to be
what
doing
are
like
these videos?
and
Well,
stuff
the
like that.
behavioral clinic is full of other children.
You want to see what a good day is for some of these kids?
So I think these videos are Kevin's perception of the other kids. There is just an undeniable amount of connections and similarities between this episode and this show. It just really feels like Blue's Clues is all a fantasy inside of Kevin Jeffries' head. But at this point, you're probably wondering, could any of this actually be intentional?
Is any of this even real?
Like, if this theory is true, does that mean that the entire plot of Blue's Clues was actually secretly based on this one random episode of Law & Order? I'll admit, that seems unlikely, especially since this episode came out a year after the Blue's Clues pilot was filmed. I think it's a lot more likely that if this was intentional, then it was probably just the Law & Order creators deciding to secretly connect these two shows on their own. Maybe just because they thought it would be funny, I don't know. Or maybe it's some weird mixture of both, because even years after this episode came out, Blue's Clues does still seem to weirdly line up with it. I honestly don't know. And to be fair, this could all still just be a bunch of weird coincidences and that's it. But regardless of the creator's intent, it still works, you know? And it makes talking about Blue's Clues a lot more interesting. And at the end of the day, I think that's kind of the point of all of these edgy Blue's Clues fan theories. And this was originally where I planned on ending this video. But there was still one lingering question that was bothering me. If Blue's Clues really is just inside of Kevin Jeffries' head, then what about when Kevin died at the beginning of the episode? I mean, I guess we can just say that the entire Blue's Clues timeline takes place before Kevin's death, and if the show ever gets canceled, then we can just say that that is when Kevin died and the fantasy ended. But what if I told you we've already seen Kevin's death inside of Blue's Clues? So, I recently watched the new Blue's Clues movie from 2022 called Blue's Big City Adventure. And not only did I find even more similarities between this movie and the show, but I believe that this movie is showing us the day that Kevin died and the true end of the Blue's Clues timeline.
I'm gonna let him cook.
So, this movie is about Josh, the newest host of Blue's Clues, going on a big adventure to audition for a Broadway musical in New York City.
Blue, we are definitely not in storybook world anymore.
It's kind of what you'd expect out of a modern-day Blue's Clues movie. He goes on a journey to the real world and gets lost. There's lots of wacky hijinks, but in the end, he finds his way and gets the part.
We want you to be the star of our Broadway show.
Yes, of course. Yes.
But if you watch this movie with this theory in mind, so many things take on a whole new meaning. The first thing that immediately caught me off guard was the opening song.
It's a brand new day.
This song is about starting the day, and Josh keeps saying, "Good morning."
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Blue.
And literally, the first thing we hear Kevin Jeffries say is, "Good morning."
So is Donovan. Good morning, how are you?
Despite it clearly being night, we also hear this line in Josh's song.
This life is just like a beautiful dream.
This life is just like a beautiful dream. Interesting. And while Josh sings, the other characters keep telling him to wake up.
Wake up! Wake up!
It's a brand new day.
Right away, this movie feels different. Like it's trying to draw attention to the fact that this world is just Kevin's fantasy and it's time for him to leave it. Josh leaves his fantasy world to go to the audition in New York, just like how Kevin escapes the clinic at the start of the episode. And just like Kevin, Josh immediately seems very disoriented by the outside world. Until, of course, his fantasy starts to take over to protect him from reality. But what's interesting about this movie is that for the very first time ever, we get these little glimpses of Blue's Clues from other people's perspectives.
Don't you think so, Madam Mustard? Oh?
Lovely to meet you.
Whoa! Mr. Schultz! Mrs. Pepper! Am I glad to see you? Oh my God!
Like I said, this movie feels different. We learned that Josh's audition is at 3 o'clock, and the whole movie is just him trying to find the audition before time runs out.
It's almost time for my audition. Oh my gosh! We don't have much time, Blue.
Could this be why Kevin kept asking people what time it was?
What time is it? What time? What time?
Josh also doesn't know where his audition is. All he knows is that it's in a theater somewhere.
Excuse me. Do you know the address to the theater?
Which theater?
I don't know which theater.
Maybe this is why Kevin went to a movie theater after he escaped, because he thought it was his Broadway audition. Now, in the Law & Order episode, shortly after leaving the theater, Kevin gets arrested and then tragically dies in police custody. But that's not what happens in this movie. Josh goes to the theater and gets the part.
We want you to be the star of our Broadway show.
Yes, of course. Yes.
But instead of him leaving and dying like Kevin, we immediately cut to him performing the musical in a big climactic finale.
My dream is a reality.
So, if this movie really is Kevin's final escape, then what if this is what Kevin experiences as he dies?
And I can feel my world changing.
A massive final magical song where he's surrounded by all of the friends from his fantasy, the only people who ever really understood him. Even the old hosts show up for this final send-off for Kevin.
And thank you
That boy Joe
for
look a
making
little
this a
different.
day and an adventure that I will never forget.
I'll never forget
It's hard to
how
say.
you helped me find all those clues. Thanks again for all your help.
No, really. Now it's over. So long.
And that is sadly where Kevin Jeffries' story ends. Now, I know this final movie theory maybe doesn't have as much evidence as the rest of my theory, but regardless, I like thinking that maybe Kevin found some peace in his final moments. And yeah, I know that this movie came out 27 years after the Law & Order episode, so it's probably a stretch to say that they're still connected. Wait, is that fucking B.D. Wong?
I'm the director of Rainbow Puppies Broadway musical.
B.D. Wong from Law & Order SVU is the fucking director of Josh's musical?
I'm not entirely comfortable labeling the suspect a serial killer.
We want you to be the star of our Broadway show.
Holy shit!
We just figured out Blue's Clues. We just figured out Blue's Clues. We just figured
I
out
don't know
Blue's
what they
Clues.
had
Because
going
this is
on.
my job.
I don't know how he.
This is actually my job. Alright, that is my theory. Thank you so much for watching. Hope I didn't ruin Blue's Clues for you. Hey, thanks for 1 million subscribers. That's really cool. YouTube sent me this big
Oh,
golden
they hit 1
rectangle.
million.
So I got that now.
Hey,
Also,
Gusto,
you know,
Alex-
Steve Burns is kind of active on the internet these days. So if by some chance you happen to see this Mr. Steve Blue's Clues, I'm sure we would all love to hear your thoughts on this theory, even if that's just him calling me crazy. I'm fine, I'll take it. I got more fan theories on the way.
Yeah,
I'm
School
doing a
Musical.
High School Musical one, maybe a Breaking Bad one. Seemed like people were interested in that. And I've got a bunch of other ideas I'm working on too, so subscribe to catch those. Make sure you hit the bell icon, because sometimes YouTube just randomly decides not to tell people when I upload. Hello, is anyone?
Well, it looked like that's the end of the video. He ain't doing nothing but shouting people out. That wasn't a bad theory, but I feel like some of that stuff he was just grabbing out the blue. Get it? Grabbing out the blue. Anyway, yeah, it wasn't a bad theory. I feel like them SpongeBob theories were more on point though. Them boys were coming in correct with the SpongeBob theories. But yeah, been recording for 29 minutes, so I'm finna go ahead and end this video right here. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Also check out my Instagram and my gaming channel. And yeah, Guess that's it, boy.